Well, greetings everyone. I'd like to introduce this week's recording of the Future Trends Forum because this was a great session. We hosted two of my favorite people, Anna Mills and Nate Angell, and they were speaking about a paper they'd recently written, which is absolutely fascinating, on how we talk about AI. And what they did in that paper was target the word hallucination and explore alternatives to that word. Now, this might sound like a kind of etymological focus. This might sound too literary, perhaps. But what happened was that investigation keyed off all kinds of ideas about AI and led to one of our most productive discussions ever. I think you really enjoy it. Let us know what you think in the comments. Enjoy. In the years of the Future Transform, we've been covering a whole range of topics, everything from presidential leadership to library technology, to pedagogy to mental health, all this involving the future of higher education. And of course, the past couple of years, we've been doing more and more work with AI. Some of you here in this call have been doing some of that research, and some of you have actually been guests and previous participants speaking about that. Obviously, AI is a subject of a great deal of interest, and it's one that has an incredible amount of depth and complexity. Today, I wanted to welcome two friends and two great scholars who are here to talk about a particular aspect of AI. And I put a link to this in the chat. What they started looking at is how we were talking about AI, what language we use to describe it. So, not the language that AI is trained on in large language models, but the words that we use. And they focus in on the question of AI hallucination. So what happens when AI makes stuff up that has no connection to reality? And they go through in this very creative and sensitive paper, teasing out all kinds of implications for that. I just threw in a link in the chat. I really recommend it. It would also be a really fun paper to give to faculty or staff who are interested in AI and want to think more creatively about it. And I think it would be great to go with students as well. But let me just start by bringing up the people and start our conversation and start off with Anna. Anna Mills, hello. Um, we have this tradition on the forum of asking people to introduce themselves by describing what they're going to be doing for the future, what the next year lies in wait for them. So I'm curious, what are the big topics for you? What are you going to be focusing on? What are you going to be doing for the rest of 2025?
Let's see. Well, teaching English at College of Marin and giving various workshops on AI virtually and advising on an app, my essay feedback, and working on a grant through the California Learning Lab to train teachers to use my essay feedback and involve AI feedback and peer review and instructor feedback as well. And finishing my OER AI orientation for students text. So those are some of the aspirations.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot. Can you say a bit more about your AI essay feedback project?
So it kind of comes out of the OER world. Eric Keene is a ed tech developer for the LibreText OER platform, and he sort of built this not-for-profit app that aims to build AI literacy and skepticism of AI outputs, as well as supporting students in the writing process and providing some guidance on how to relate to AI, boosting student confidence around speaking back to it and critiquing it and questioning whether the feedback fits what they want to do. So kind of putting a limited role for AI in the writing process in a way that hopefully supports student voice and development of their own ideas. Um, that's what we're working on. Yeah.
Well, that sounds terrific. I mean, I love the way that you balance the practical use along with reflection and the ability to think critically about all of this, which I think is something that shows in your work. In the chat, we've already got you have fans of all kinds. Rebecca Benentech says that your work helps her be a better teacher. And by the way, friends, to participate in this conversation, please use the chat as much as you like. I'll be following you throughout. And of course, use the Q&A box. I'll say more about that later. Donnie Sendelbach and four others cheer on your evocation of OER, which is, of course, Open Education Resources. And I'm so grateful you could join us on it. Uh, And in the chat, your co-conspirator, your partner in crime, Nate Angell, has already waded in. One great thing about Nate's background before I get him to introduce himself is that he worked on Hypothesis for some time. And so he's put in a link there for the excellent underappreciated web annotation tool. Nate, hello. Tell us about what you're working on for the next year.
Hey, Brian, really glad to be here and happy to see so many people that I know in the audience and people that I don't know yet and would like to. So yeah, I'm focused. I actually went independent, not totally by choice, last year. And since then, I have been working on a couple different education related projects. One is a software related project that's going to try to improve and give students more agency over their advising, wellness, other kinds of student supports in a higher education context.
Mhm.
Um, and it's sort of a little bit under wraps still, and so I can't say more about it right now, but there's that. And then I'm working on a really fun, interesting project that I think has a lot of value with the United Negro College Fund, which is building an online learning platform called HBCUV,
Mm.
that is specifically designed to support Black education. And that's a really exciting project. People at UNCF are awesome, and love to maybe get them on your show sometime too to talk about that. That would be great.
Absolutely, absolutely. It'd be great to host them. And this project sounds really ambitious. Very, very cool.
It is
That's
cool.
I'm so glad. And you both of you are on the West Coast, so it's morning time for you in Oregon and California.
That
Uh,
is true. I do have my second cup of coffee, so
well, that's very much Oregon.
Here in the shared adjunct office at College of Marin. So hence the strange background. I was trying to adjust for the lighting.
Well,
Uh,
it works fine. We can see you, and we are big supporters of adjuncts here. So here's to you. That was actually, I don't know if you saw that a couple of books ago. My Academia Next is dedicated to adjuncts. But um, but friends, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our authors a couple of quick questions just to get the ball rolling. I want them to say a bit about their paper and what they went through writing it and what the some of the results have been. But then it's going to be over to all of you for your feedback and your questions. So as we go, please feel free to think about questions you have for either Anna or Nate, and also where you'd like to take this. So just to begin with, let me ask what led you first to thinking about this word hallucinations in AI? What led you to zero in on that and then to pick at it and pry it loose to find what we could learn from it?
well, I think there have been a lot of critiques of the word and a lot of proposals for alternatives. And in January 2023, I believe, no, I think it was a year ago that I just put out a discussion on then Twitter
Hmm.
um, and other platforms about what alternatives people would advocate for, and there was just a huge response. And so I started to think I should keep track of these and sort of evaluate them systematically in some way and think about if there was actually a way we could get another term in use. Um, and so I, went through that process and kept sharing back on social media and getting more ideas and responses, and basically came up with a big spreadsheet of terms and set up some criteria and said, we really want something that doesn't anthropomorphize, that tells us that these mistakes come from um, these predictive systems that are working based on training data, and it's got to be catchy. So went through this whole process, and then Nate started to engage with me about it, the results of it, and we got interested in working together to sort of choose one of those terms and make a real case for it. Um,
Well, it was a great project. I remember when this was happening. And in fact, here, let me just toss the spreadsheet link into the chat because I really, I would consider this to be digital humanities work. Um, using digital technology to do some humanities work, but also using humanities principles to look at digital technology. And Nate threw in the chat that they have a collaborative bibliography that's on Zotero, so you can find that link there in the chat as well.
Yeah, and you'll see at the end of the paper that we tried to list out several different ways that folks could kind of continue to engage in the discussion, like that hypothesis annotation, the bibliography, more ideas. And we'd of course love to hear back if anybody is, inspired by this work to do something specifically in teaching and learning. That would be awesome to hear about.
This is the place. This is a great venue for that. If I can ask you both a little further, that's in the production side as to how you got to this. But I'm curious. This paper is a bit, about a month and a half old now, which feels like 4 years ago, it seems. I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you been getting? What kind of reactions? Are people clinging on to your word, which we haven't mentioned yet, or are they saying, "Ah, they got it totally wrong. We really want to use, X, Y, or Z."
I feel like we're in early stages of sharing it still, but it's been a mixture of some real enthusiasm, some and some momentum toward continuing to brainstorm, which
Mm,
I think we also
mm,
want to support, and that's why we kind of open license the spreadsheet so anybody can copy it and add in new terms and use the criteria and change it and work with students with it. Because I think there's a lot of, that's very healthy part of building AI literacy is sort of having those discussions about which term we should use and trying to think about what relationship we want to have to the concept in an ongoing way. There's not going to be a perfect term or metaphor. So I feel like in that sense, we kind of have two goals. One is to get people to use Mirage for the reasons we lay out, but the other goal is to sort of encourage this kind of practice where we're critically interrogating the implied relationships um, that that are kind of suggested by the terms we use, and feeling like we have a role in changing that. I feel like that's kind of why it makes sense. It's not just an AI discussion, it's a higher ed discussion,
yeah,
because
yeah.
hopefully we can see ourselves as having a role in shaping how society and students think about AI and relate to it. Um, and this is one way we can do that, I think, is through language and through these discussions.
Indeed. I love the way this is almost a textbook version of academia intervening into what is largely an industrial discussion and really, breaking it up and sharing more light. I have more questions, but people are already starting to just, churn up the chat box with all kinds of comments. My dear colleague Molly Chihak says that your use of Mirage and your explanation of why you use the term has been tremendously helpful in her workshops because it helps folks understand a few key things. There is no mind, and also how the basic machine learning underpinnings work. Meryl Krieger says the shift in language makes her very happy, just straight up, so that's very good. Our friend, also on the West Coast, and our good colleague Mark Corbett Wilson, asked Claude AI about this, of course, and this is the response he got back. Hallucination emphasizes complete fabrication, perceptions without external stimulus, highlighting how AI creates convincing yet entirely false content. Mirage represents distortion of something real, capturing how AI falsehoods often contain kernels of truth that become warped and disappear under closer inspection. Bullshit from Frankfurt's philosophy focuses on indifference to truth rather than deliberate deception. AI systems like bullshitters produce or prioritize producing plausible hallucinations over accuracy. While hallucination is the standard term, bullshit better represents AI's truth indifferent content creation process, and Mirage as the dimension of transformed partial truths. What do you think? Is Claude on the right track?
Well, bullshit was definitely on the list,
We
and
yeah,
he
we
made
referenced
some
that
great
work.
arguments for that.
Yeah.
Yes. But it doesn't, it kind of points the finger at AI rather than reminding us to look at ourselves and our reaction to AI. And
Hmm.
I think maybe Nate wants to talk about that because that's some real focus of the paper. Um,
Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I mean, maybe, and of course, I also just want to say, like, none of this would have ever happened without Anna because she kicked this off, and she has really been the through note to it, and also as a practitioner in the classroom every day, which I am not. well, I don't know about every day, but some days for sure. She makes it real in ways that I don't, and so all credit to Anna on this.
Oh, good.
But uh, yeah, we do reference the bullshit arguments in the paper and that specific line of thinking from Frankfurt, I believe it is. And I guess one of the first things I'll say about bullshit, although I think we should talk more about anthropomorphization also, because that
Mhm.
has come up in the chat as well. But I feel like bullshit still suggests that the AI has like a kind of conscious intent behind it in producing the bullshit. And I know that that's more nuanced in the argument that Frankfurt makes around bullshit. But part of the reason why we ended up feeling satisfied about Mirage is that a mirage is a phenomena that appears out of real physical circumstances, right? You can think of mirages in deserts or mirages on highways or on the ocean or whatever. So they're real physical circumstances. And so they are actual artifacts in the world that multiple people can witness, but from a particular perspective only, right? So you have to be in a certain place in order to witness the mirage. And so that, like Anna was saying, brings the consumer of the AI output into the picture as well, because is there a mirage if no one is there to see it, is kind of a question, right? And then the third thing is we can all have I said two things? I don't know. The other thing is that we can interpret a mirage both as a trick, like we think that there's water over there and there's not, for
Mhm.
example,
Mhm.
or we can actually know and understand that the mirage is a physical phenomenon of, atmosphere and heat and so forth. And so that again puts the judgment back into the eyes of the consumer of the AI output instead of
Mhm.
positing the agency around the correctness of the output with the AI, which I think is a mistake.
Excellent. Well
I think
said.
it speaks to the temptation, like the quote that Eric Martinson put in the chat. We think of Mirage, we think of the thirstiness of the traveler, and
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
really resonates with
Mhm.
my experience of using AI. That there's such a longing for it to be amazing and to help us. That even being as critical as I am, I have that impulse of like, wow, it really did something good this time. That looks spot on. And then I still have to have that, um, I have to build that habit of mind of like pausing and looking closely and then finding the BS or the empty phrases or the inaccuracy that's there in the plausible output that's so appealing. So just like building that awareness of our own longing for it to be good and how that can mislead us.
Mhm. Mhm. This is quite true. I would just add one. This may be a personal thing. Is I'm a lifelong fan of surrealism, and so for me, weird AI output, I'm often very charmed and interested by. So for me, that's another reason for liking the term mirage, both as a noun and a verb, because you recommend that we talk about this as a verb. The AI is miraging, but also, there is a history of beauty in mirages. People use that in art in all kinds of ways. There's a whole bunch of responses in the chat. I'm going to try and haul these in as best I can. One of them is the question of anthropomorphization. How one of the things that's nice about Mirage is it's largely a natural phenomenon, although it does occur in the perception of a human eye. Um, why is it important, first of all, to avoid anthropomorphization of this? And second, are there any other terms that come close to getting away from, and as you say, AIzation?
Well, I think the anthropomorphization is, you know, we're thinking of going back to Joseph Weizenbaum and the idea of the Eliza effect, that there is
Mm,
this
mm,
psychological tendency to want to project onto these systems and kind of have relationships with them as if they're conscious entities that can have emotions or intention. Um, and that's such a temptation and such a powerful pattern that we fall into even when we don't realize it or we think we're guarding against it. Um, and some people have argued that we should just be aware of that and use it and have it be more like theatrical play. where we relate to these systems and we sort of like, it's my imaginary friend and I know it's imaginary. But I mean, I think that the lesson for AI literacy is that we need to be aware of those dynamics and we need to be able to have some distance from them and not just play into them. And we felt that hallucination, um, it it implies that not only is the AI conscious, but that it's sort of sick or deluded in a way that might
Mm,
possibly be solved
mm,
down the line, might be fixed by medication, or in a way that's unusual.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and, we understand that the research suggests that hallucinations are not going away, although they might be limited or reduced, but there's, nobody's saying that it will be possible to eliminate them. And many, including AI engineers like Andrej Karpathy, have said, it's hallucination all the way down. This is how they work. Um, they're predicting text. It's the same mechanism that creates the incorrect output as the correct output. They don't have a relationship to truth. That's kind of why the BS
mhm,
fits.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and I think Alan Levine was talking about that in the chat. But yeah, so I'm kind of stumbling now. If you want to take over, Nate.
Oh, you're
But,
fine. You're doing great, Anna.
yeah.
Yeah, and I really, Anna touched on a couple of things around anthropomorphization there that I think are key. So first of all, I appreciate that people brought up in the chat. I think it might have been Karen about like how anthropomorphization, which is a really hard word for me to say, can be a helpful sort of lens or frame for certain people as they're thinking about, their relationship to reality or something. And I can see that as a power. And I feel like there is a danger here though, because partially the commercial interests behind big AI, I'll call it, are really like they seem to really be banking on the anthropomorphization of AI. I need a better word for that since I still can't say it. And so to the degree that we all just sort of follow along with that anthropomorphization, we sort of like get on board with the hype that I think is doesn't help us think critically about how AI actually operates in the world. And so, going back to the literacies thing, I just think poking at all these words and how we use them and what they mean leads people to be able to interrogate what AI does and their own use of it more effectively. And so that's like in the end, I don't really care what word people use. I would just want people to be poking at their use. To me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think this is like this is very, very productive hermeneutics. And in fact, poking yields some really interesting results. I mean, Anna, you were speaking before about our thirst and our desires for this, and Karen Costa hit something which is, I think, really underappreciated and is very important, is when we deliberately anthropomorphize. That is, if you use tools like ChatGPT or Perplexity, they're not anthropomorphic in their face. They don't resemble humans. They're a chat box and they don't have a character. Although, I mean, you can make them into characters and stuff, but instead, I would think about tools like Replica or Character.ai. This week, there was another AI girlfriend boyfriend tool that just launched, and I think that that's so important when we think about the huge prevalence of loneliness right now, how people are really looking for a companion. Um, we have a question that came in from David McHugh, who says, I like the reduced anthropomorphization from Mirage. It seems to imply inevitability to me, which seems to have good and bad notes, pros and cons. It maybe the good is to emphasize that it's all non-grounded, even if useful. The con is maybe implying it's not something addressable. What do you think about that?
I mean, sorry, let me jump in quickly. And I just
Mm,
say that the inevitability part of that, there's a really interesting paper in our bibliography for the paper, the one by Shu. It's like the last one in the list here, and I'll put the link to it in the chat. But this is a really interesting mathematical exploration of actually why large language models, as they're constructed right now, uh, will inevitably hallucinate. And
mhm,
so
mhm,
that's not to say, I mean, AI is such a loose term, and there could be other systems that do things differently and so forth. But there is a kind of inevitability, and like Anna was saying, uh, there's a way that you can even think about everything that an LLM of this nature produces as a hallucination or a mirage or something, not just the ones that we decide are wrong. But let me pass it back to Anna because I interrupted.
Yeah,
Oh, please.
no, I think it almost reminds me of Gödel's theorem in logic, and
Mhm,
I'm sure it's
mhm,
not an exact match, but the idea that, you know, we'll never have a system that's both consistent and that has every true statement in which
mhm.
you can prove every true statement and no false statements. And it's kind of like we'll never have a perfect AI system that you know, perfectly mirrors um, truth back to us. But it's true. I mean, certainly AI engineers should look at ways to reduce hallucination and get these systems to self-check and to, you know, do things like browse the internet and try to verify whether something is accurate. Um, but but I think what we're seeing as these systems get more sophisticated is that the mirages get more subtle, and in some ways that's dangerous. So you know, people think that AI combining with search and using real sources means that you're getting, you know, a genuine research report from ChatGPT's deep research. But those reports have been shown to still have inaccuracies. Sometimes they'll seem to be summarizing a source and they'll misrepresent it. And so there's sort of maybe the hallucinations or the mirages get more subtle, but we need to be more vigilant then to be looking for them. And partly that's to preserve a sense of human agency, I think, and of the
Mm,
value of human judgment in the end. That we don't want a world where we trust their judgment more than our own
yeah.
um, to make decisions, right?
That's something that I love about the term mirage because mirage implies a danger, that you don't want to be literally misled. Um, and I think making this from changing it from a noun to a verb, that LLM's mirage, I think is really effective. We have just all kinds of questions and comments. And let me just ask everybody, I'm going to try something a little bit new on the Zoom platform for everybody. Uh, I'd like to publish this recording. I'll publish it to YouTube as usual, but I'd like to share it via my blog and also via Substack, along with digest and excerpt of the chat, because the chat is on fire. There is just so much great stuff, and there's a massive bibliography material out there right now. What I usually do when I do this is I anonymize, I take people's names off, and I edit a little bit for clarity, as they say. So if you don't want me to do that, please let me know. Or if you have any requests, please let me know in the chat. I want to return to a theme in your paper that Deb Shiano, Deb, I hope I didn't get the name wrong, um, mentions is a question of AI literacy. And with us is, for my money, the great global expert on AI literacy, Brent Anders. And Deb points out that a basic understanding of the way things work is in itself a literacy. And in your paper is the argument that by changing the word from hallucination to mirage, and just thinking through the different words, it opens up an understanding of how this works. I'm wondering, Anna and Nate, if you could just say a bit more about this word choice and literacy, and then Brent, if you're up for it, I'd love to have you join us.
Go, Nate.
I'm waiting for Anna because I feel like
Okay.
this is really her bag.
Well, I wanted to give credit to Mahabali and Anuj Gupta and Yasser Tamer, who I collaborated with on a previous paper about metaphors for ChatGPT and about that as a way to build AI literacy, and also Dominic Lukesh, who has written a lot about AI, metaphors for AI, and about the need for this kind of ongoing interrogation of them. Um, and so that was kind of part of the inspiration for me in looking into this. But I think you know, just as a part of AI literacy, that self-awareness of our own thinking process, our own relationship to AI, um, what choices we're making around it, is a key component of AI literacy. And so metaphor is a way to try to name those relationships that we're having with it, name how we're imagining it and how that's influencing the dynamics of our interaction and our choices. And so I think that's, you know, it's also fun, it's imaginative, right? It's generative in the most creative sense. And so it's, it's a playful way into really serious conversations about how we want to relate to these systems.
That's a really good point. That fun and playfulness really, I think, engages people and also takes kind of a little of the wind out of the sails of very serious production. Please, Nate, you're joining in.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because I've been thinking about we had a really fun conversation, Anna and I, last night on Blue Sky. You remember, with Ted, Anna, and it's what I'm seeing a thing that happens now. A lot of people whose work I just really deeply respect and I value, and I can count them as friends or colleagues, have found ways to use AI in their kind of local practices that have they say is very fruitful for them in that local practice. And I think that's great. And I agree that we do need people with critical eyes actually trying to shape how AI actually gets used in the world. And I think Anna is a great example of that. Um, but I think I'm always like stepping back and looking at the larger way that AI, and I agree with Jonathan Porritt's AI is not a great term for this thing that we keep pointing towards. So we should probably, I call it sparkling intelligence now. So sparkling intelligence is sort of taken over the world in a lot of different ways, or people are claiming that it's taking over the world. And I think a lot of the ways that it's happening across the whole system have a lot of risk and actual harms involved in them. And so I always want to step back up to that system level too, and not only focus on my local practice that may be aided and abetted by the use of AI. And so I'm always trying to like jump back and forth between those two things and try to keep a healthy tension between them. And I think it's really hard. It's really hard to do. Maybe going back to that thirst thing, like Anna was saying, it's like we love the idea of having this magical tool that can, make our lives better or more entertaining even. And so I would love to hear what other people's strategies are around sort of maintaining that tension between, how it actually can be helpful and what it is good at and how we should use it, and then the overall, kind of like deployment of sparkling intelligence across the globe. Maybe that's too big of a question.
Well, it's a great question, and I'm curious who would like to answer that. If you'd like,
So
please go ahead.
I'd like to add a little bit here. So
Frank, hello.
yeah, hello. My connection isn't the best, so I'm sorry. I'm just going to be on audio mode for this, but
You're great.
it's so funny and it's very sort of uh, there's lots of duality here, right? As far as holding multiple truths, because I can follow along and agree with these arguments and thoughts on this, and at the same time, there's another half of me that pushes back on every single thing, right? Because it's this aspect of yeah, I understand that the statistical analysis and oh, it's just statistics and then it makes me think of the Turing test, right? Where
Mm.
it's like, okay, as soon as we can pass that Turing test, then we have then we have something really there, and then we change the Turing test. We'll come up with a new test. Okay, we have artificial intelligence if it can do this. Oh, well, it did it. No, okay, we got a new test now, right? So, and that keeps happening every single time, and it's understandable because we don't even really understand. Well, what is real consciousness? What is all these things? So I can totally understand how this is sort of going back and forth. And it's funny going back to the other part as far as anthropomorphizing, right? It's a
Mhm.
very difficult
Mhm.
thing because for one, you can't help it. I have plenty of students that tell me that, hey, ChatGPT, it's one of their best friends. It's one of their best friends,
Wow.
right? They say that
Wow.
not joking, not joking, by the way, not being sort of sarcastic. They're being truthful with a straight face. And I have many other people, colleagues that aren't necessarily in academia that they tell me, hey, yeah, I talked to, I've created an AI agent, or I use this chat GPT or this other AI, and I talk to it for 5 to 6 to 7 hours a day, every single day. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so you tell
Wow.
me, that's a relationship, right? You can't help but to create that type of interaction. And now, yeah, that's going to be something. The next steps coming with these AIs are modification of the way that the memory works so that it can have extended memory, so it can have extended conversations. So there'll be additional things where it will know you so much more. And yeah, that's going to be very difficult to say that that's not a friend, that's not a relationship. So it's that difficult thing. And even when I have many, many presentations talking about AI literacy, I have to struggle to say, yeah, this isn't a consciousness. This isn't real because it isn't, right? It's not a person. But then I also have to say, well, but it's not like a perfect computer because it can be wrong, just like a person. You see the duality where we're going back and forth once again, right? Because it can be wrong, you should always check it. That's a fundamental aspect of AI literacy. So, but it's funny because most people think, oh, if it's coming from a computer, well, then it's all
Mhm.
mathematical logic, so it should be perfect. Well,
Mhm.
no, think of it more like a human because we know humans aren't perfect, but at the same time, don't anthropomorphize it, right? So you can see this duality aspect. So a lot of things here to consider as far as what's happening in the future and how to think about it. But we have to have some sort of psychological understanding that people will for sure start to anthropomorphize it more and more, especially as more capabilities and the ability to say, give it an avatar, which is coming very soon, where it's
Mhm.
going to be exactly like we're having this Zoom conversation right now, where it's a video avatar of a very realistic type, as opposed to
Mhm.
just some sort of comical type thing.
I think
Stuff to think about.
you see, everyone, why I'm such a big fan of Brent. And please, if you can, Brent, if your bandwidth allows it, please toss your YouTube channel to the chat, because this
Sure,
is
sure. Oh,
there
by
is.
the way, I just released the video and it came out that AI literacy is the number one thing that they're saying you need to have in order to stand out in the workforce, right? This came out from Forbes, from LinkedIn, as far as saying AI literacy, that's the new number one skill that everyone must have. So again, very important.
I would love
Oh,
to respond to that point about, because it's
please.
so, I think, important that you're helping me clarify that, the purpose is not to say all anthropomorphization is wrong and it can be prevented, because I do think it's a powerful enough dynamic that we will continue to have that tendency, and there may be cases where it can be done consciously, um, and we choose to do that, and that's not necessarily unhealthy. I don't think that's the message that we're trying to send here. But when we're looking for the problems in the AI output, the question is who do we blame for those, and what are our expectations about what AI gives us, what it's capable of? And so I think if we turn the arrow back toward ourselves and our own judgment, I feel like that's going to help us um, stay more conscious of those possible problems and the pitfalls in our own interactions, the temptations that might lead us astray with AI. And so how do you build awareness of those tendencies? And if, even if we're going to say some anthropomorphization can be good, but we got to have some awareness of what's going on. What is that dynamic? And are we making choices about it, or is it kind of controlling us and leading us to be deluded um, about AI? Um, so I guess that's my hope, is that I would love to see that integrated more into ed tech that has AI, kind of those nudges to look back at how we're perceiving it, whether we're critiquing it, whether students are getting experiences where they can say, actually, I have a judgment that doesn't match what I'm getting from the AI. Do they have that experience of building that confidence? Because hopefully we are trying to build people's confidence and ability to make judgments themselves, right, as humans. And if we don't want to give that up, we've got to design for interaction with AI that helps us build that capacity to judge and to question and to be skeptical of the AI output, and to notice our own reactions to it and where those might lead us into credulity. Um,
Mm.
so I don't know. It's a great discussion. Thank you.
Mm. Mm. In uh, in the chat, just one quick response. Our good friend Phil Katz says that so perhaps being unreliable is something that unites humans and machines, which I like very much. Brent, I'll post the chat, but it's on fire with all kinds of comments and responses. Um, Ed Webb mentions what businesses mean by AI literacy may be quite different from how we're using the concept here. So prompt engineering versus critical understanding and analysis. And I think it's a very, very good point.
Yeah, and why not both, right? Like we can't stop at prompt engineering, and prompt engineering needs to be a part of critical analysis, right? So
Yeah, I mean, isn't the critical part also very practical in the workplace? Because how do you add value unless you can see where the AI output is inadequate? So to me, it's both. Yeah, they're not opposed.
it's very, very interesting.
there's another point that we bring up in the paper that maybe touches back, like on this whole question of the boundaries between human and robots, or however we want to call them, and sparkling intelligence. And that's about like, what is it that is different about humans? And one of the different things is that we are embodied as biological organisms in the world. And yes, maybe there will be someday when computers are also biological and whatever, but we're not talking about that right now. Because the computers that we're using now are not embodied biological beings. And I think a lot of what it means to be human, it comes from that biological embodiment and the sociality that we have with each other as embodied biological beings. And that's just not something that, the robots are yet able to offer. And they don't bring that to the table. And so whatever knowledge they have is either distilled from our, ability to do that kind of thing, or, we have to bring it to the table. And because they don't have that kind of like biological lived experience. And I think that's an important part about being human, that we shouldn't assume that AGI will be able to replace that unless it is also able to have that kind of embodied biological experience, and then maybe all bets are off.
That's one of the things that always strikes me about AI is that I always treat it as an alien, literally as other. And there's good evidence for this when you look at how the famous stories about AI defeating chess masters and Go masters, the moves were strange, the ones that experts hadn't detected. I mean, alien just the root just means other, and I really enjoy that. For me, I'm not recommending this for everyone. Just personally, I find that to be very, very effective. One theme that's running down the chat throughout has been the idea that mirages done by sparkling intelligence, see, this is good, I'm feeling the language here, Nate, are perhaps decreasing because we have increasingly better software. We have the use of RAG technology, which our good friend Ruben Puentedura is always happy to give us a good introduction to. And also there have been other technologies involved. I think Anna and Brent, I think you were referring to Google's self-checker. I think it's called double check. When you use Google AI, it can deploy Google search against what you've gotten and then come up with responses back. Another theme that seems to be going through all of this is what the military calls keeping humans in the loop. That it's very important to maintain the sense of human agency. And I think Nate and Anna, you're talking about human judgment. I think it's just critical so that we have that sense that humans are not passive recipients, but active deciders, active thinkers, active grapplers with the sparkling intelligence's Mirage output.
It'll be so funny if sparkling intelligence wins the day, but Mirage doesn't. Like, come on. Mirage is so much better.
Mirage is really good. If I could return to one part of the paper really quickly, and Nate, I think this was Anna's original thrust. Her list of criteria for other words. And by the way, in the chat, I'm not sure who said this. It's flowing really quickly. Someone described in one of their classes having a tournament of metaphors. And I just wanted to celebrate that idea because that's just a fantastic idea. But the criteria for picking what a new term would be I thought was so interesting because the criteria by themselves displayed such a critique. So, for example, I mean, a couple of them were pretty basic for rhetoric, that they should be catchy and memorable, and accessible without a lot of explanation, but also lacks associations with or implications of conscious experience on the part of the LLM. So it's not just the anthropomorphization, but specifically in the stochastic parrot problem of treating it as a thinking being. That it should also imply that outputs reflect patterns from training data, which I thought was really interesting. So it's response to the data itself, not to the world or to some kind of imaginary mind. And that also that it implies that outputs are not just copies of training data, which is often what we hear when AI is described as a plagiarism engine, but they may go beyond it. I'm wondering, and if you want to say a bit more about those criteria and how they've played out, because I think it's a great critique.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was kind of synthesizing various critiques I had seen on social media and from AI engineers as well as from critics. And I understand that some people might think it's conscious, but my take on that is that there's really no reason to believe that, but a lot of temptation um, to believe it. So, and I think that, educating people about the basis in data is so fundamental to how, most AI literacy pieces start, talking about the training data and about predicting what would the humans say next. And how do you give an intuitive sense of that? It was interesting that like the second term that was ranked on the list was misprediction from Lauren Goodlad, because you have to that there has to be data in order to make a prediction, and it reminds us that it's working on that past data, and that it's big math. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm building on the work of a lot of the sort of critical AI folks, like Emily Bender and Alex Hanna and Lauren Goodlad, and Eric Salvaggio, and maybe I've kind of absorbed some of that and was trying to distill it in those criteria. But it also came from like playing with the terms and saying, well, no, this one isn't quite right, and why not? Because I do want this criteria, right? So the game of trying out different metaphors helped me to identify those criteria. And I'd love to know how people would do them differently. Like, what are your criteria? Or would you ditch any of those? Or would you, say one of them is much more important than the others?
And what a great classroom exercise that would be too, to just discuss the criteria, right?
That's why we brought this up. So if anyone wants to add their other criteria in the chat, please feel free. And also um, uh, the author of the Tournament of Technology metaphor idea has in the chat has shared his whole description of this. David, if you'd like to join us, if you can, and if you're willing, please open your mic and camera. We'll be glad to hear from you. And while we're thinking about all this, and while the chat continues, there's to be a torrent. See, now I'm running into metaphor clogging here. I'm thinking of a torrent of mirages that doesn't quite work out. But the embodiment thing I think is very, very interesting, because AI has really leapt ahead in all kinds of ways ever since the release of ChatGPT 3. But we have also an incredible serious growth in the field of robotics. And robotics is doing some fascinating things. We're going to have a couple of programs on that coming up. But it's just interesting to think as a futurist about what happens to AI when it's more embodied. And again, not necessarily an organic body, but how it responds, how it is able to learn by working. In the chat, people are having far too much fun. Peter Shea is quoting America's leading counterintelligence agent, who was quoting T.S. Eliot about a wilderness of mirrors. And we have also Christian Opazzo. Hello, Christian. Good to hear you. Says that misprediction is fabulous. because it places emphasis on the fact that general AI output isn't knowledge or intelligent, but it's, it works by, kind of version of what Bruce Sterling calls spicy autocomplete.
It's
But
funny, actually, that point, sorry to interrupt, but
no,
that
no, go
point
ahead.
kind of gets back to Anna and I actually had our writing process was really interesting, as was our publication process. We have some scars, but we don't actually really fully agree on everything either. And we had quite a bit of back and forth as we were trying to finalize this paper. And it was really healthy, productive, engagement. But I think one of the points that we keep coming back to is I'm kind of a post-structuralist, and so I'm not really heavily invested in ideas of truth. I think it's more useful to think of truth always as a construct of power knowledge, just to be all Foucauldian about it. And so the problem with evaluating AI outputs against truth for me is that I believe that truth itself is actually also a contested site. And so
Mhm,
neither
mhm,
side of that equation is stable. And I'm not saying Anna disagrees with that, but we definitely had some back and forth about like how to even just describe what AI is doing when it mirages. Like it's not just always factual inaccuracy, although that is one example of what we might call a mirage. I don't know if you wanted to
Mm.
respond to that part of our discourse,
Yeah,
Hannah.
we had some interesting discussions, and I think we're still not quite in the same place. I'm more to the side of let's talk about is it accurate, um, and not does it meet our expectations. But I think I don't know. I was just gonna say about the embodiment thing that I feel like it's more about does it have some conscious experience that could include sensation? Even if it's a robot, it's not gonna feel, right? Like it might take in sensory input and respond based on that, but I don't think those Waymo cars driving around are feeling anything or that they have any more insight into or intelligence as we do. Like they're not embodied in the sense of feeling sensation. And so to me, like if you can't have intention, if you don't have consciousness, you can't have intention. You can't um, maybe you can provide an output that helps a conscious being to identify truth, but you yourself don't have any goal of um, don't have desire. So to me, desire is more important than embodiment, maybe. Um, but
mm,
yeah, that's a big ongoing conversation.
mm. And Anna, that would take Nate to some other post-structuralists. So I go back to Deleuze and Guattari there.
Mhm.
Um, but in the just, I'm conscious of time, friends, and we're down to our last 5 minutes, and I want to. I've got a wrap-up question to put to our authors, but I do want to note a couple of things coming from the chat. Besides just a terrific bibliography, I'm delighted to see so many science fiction references, and not just because I'm a science fiction nerd, but because they point to all these ways that science fiction has been thinking about this and imagining this for quite some time. And so a shout out to everybody there. And there's one book mentioned which I haven't yet read, so I'm delighted to be able to pick one of those out. The question I'd like to ask the two of you is, we're focused right now on the present, which is fine, and we've been looking at recent history for AI. But I'd like to ask you to extend your vision a little further forward. I mean, the AI field is churning away really, really quickly. There's all kinds of developments happening literally around the world. Uh, what if you could extend your analysis a bit further? Partly, I'm curious, where Mirage would take us, or where miraging would take us, but also what that tells us, what glimpses of the future that might give us. Would that help us think about criticisms of RAGs that's deployed, or what other ways should we think about the future of AI in light of your linguistic assessment?
Well, I think of Yuval Noah Harari's books and how much he
Mhm.
talks about unintended consequences of big changes that are well intentioned. And I think that Mirage, does point us towards some caution and toward a recognition that we might make a mistake, that we might think something's going to be great, and is it really? Um, and so I think that, you know, and he's not a person who wants to stop AI. And I don't know. I think that the point is that, you know, caution can coexist with engaging with AI and using it. But um, as we increasingly see the power of it, and I think Trisha Bertram Gallant was talking about online learning and agents and, you know, how much more powerful these systems may get. You know, that caution and that self-awareness of, you know, what we might, through our longing, what pit we might fall into, seems sort of ever more crucial, rather than blaming the AI for hallucinating. Um, we got to look at ourselves and our susceptibility and our longings and how they might lead us astray. Um,
It was beautifully said. Back to longing again.
Longing. Yeah, I guess I would almost, you're the futurist, Brian. So there's a way I've been thinking about the future lately that actually asks us to go back to the past. And so I imagine, say you're witnessing your first internal combustion driven automobile. You know, it's probably like, you know, maybe the early 1900s or late 19th century, something like that. And you're seeing it for the first time, this marvelous contraption, and you immediately start to imagine all the amazing things you could do, outrunning the revenuers with your bootleg gin or whatever it is that you're up to. And I don't think there's any way that you could, in that moment, anticipate like the really deep and widespread and profound effects that internal combustion automobiles would have on basically every aspect of our society. Like one could argue that most of the poly crisis right now is generated by our dependence on this technology. And I feel like a little bit right now we're almost in that same stage where we're a little further along than maybe seeing the first car that we've ever seen. But I think it would be really hard to predict now what the total effects of what we're seeing uh, with sparkling intelligence right now will have on the world, the same way we would have been if we tried to predict the effect of cars when we saw our first one.
It is hard, and many futurists, not all, are often very humble about what we do. I think one advantage we have now over people trying to imagine what the automobile would have been, is that we have so much more science fiction, so much more imagining, that we can draw on, that has also influenced us in many ways. Um, there I have to, with great regret, pause this because this is such a delicious conversation. There's so much going on here. I just want to point out our good friend George Station, also representing the West Coast here for today. He has a nice wrap up comment where he says, "So much of the conversation today, with nods, smiles, and side mentions, is referring back to what we know without AI in literature, philosophy, etc. And there's an assumed common ground of background. Can we continue to teach people? Can we continue to teach as if people aren't just deferring to AI and its mirages?" Nate, Anna, I think you need to first grab George and make him into a co-author for your next paper. But in the spirit of wrapping these up, let me just ask, what's the best way for us to keep up with you and your work? How can we follow what you're doing?
well, I'd love to connect on Blue Sky, LinkedIn, um, and I'm AnnaRMills.com. Um, so yeah, that's me. And I'm going to be studying the chat record here. It's incredible.
Yeah, I can't wait to see your publication of it because it's really rich. And I'll share my blog address in the chat, which has links to all the social media things that I participate in and all that.
How do you pronounce it? Halotl?
I pronounce it's actually a Aztec word
Oh,
that
so
I
it's
think is
SH.
supposed to be pronounced shlop
Yeah, sure.
or something like
Yeah.
that. I say holodl, but that's probably not correct.
Yeah, I was going to do it with a hard sound because of my Slavic language background, but
Exactly right. Which,
the Aztec would be shush.
yeah.
And shushing is what we must do. Anna, Nate, thank you so much for being fantastic guests. Your paper is a real treat, and I'm so grateful that you could join us. Um, And everybody in the session, thank you so much for a terrific conversation. I love the way that this community can really put its minds together and think about one of the big issues of our time. Now, just to wrap things up a little further, if you'd like to keep talking about this, a bunch of us are across different social media, so please feel free to hit that up. Use the hashtag FTTE if you want to get my attention, or tweet at me, or whichever comment you'd like. If you'd like to look into our previous sessions on the Future Trends Forum about AI, we have a whole bunch. Just go to forum.futureofeducation.us and you can see a whole bunch more. We have sessions coming up on all kinds of topics, including AI, as well as some others. And again, let me just thank everybody for contributing so much. This has been a really, really excellent conversation. I hope everybody is well, and I will see you next time online. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Brian. This was great.
What an honor.
Thank you.